Hey guys, Jeff Francoeur here. Thanks for listening to our content and please like and subscribe. Before we get to the podcast, if you have middle school or high school kids that play sports and you don't want to fundraise like me, we got you covered. My buddy Chris Carneal owns Booster. Chris?
We help schools and sports teams raise funds in a super fun and engaging way. In fact, the last 22 years, we've raised $750 million, and we can't wait to help you. Choose booster.com.
Back with Pure Athlete, I'm Jeff Francoeur along with Britt and Brad. And guys, we just had a great conversation with Angie Asche, sports nutritionist. And I've told you all I played with her husband at 15, but I think what great just guidelines she can lay for any sort of, I look for athletes, but even kids, for adults, anything like that, things that can help you. I thought it was awesome.
Yeah, it's great stuff. This interview's packed full of information that is going to be super helpful to parents of kids who are really trying to maximize their performance.
Yeah.
We fired probably 50 questions at her, just all
did.
over the board, and she was just great. And just it's so much great information. I really recommend it for parents and their athletes.
Yeah, I think one thing we did learn was that Brad doesn't do sugar anymore. So I think you'll be glad to know that. It's been 4 months, I think, which is great. But joking aside, I do think she's great though because she's realistic too. I've had nutritionists come in before and they're don't do this, and it's like really, and
I think common sense.
She was very like she even said, sometimes you're gonna have something like this. It's all about when to have it for recovery time, and I thought that was the most important thing that I learned was not so much what you eat, but it's when you eat it.
Yeah. Well, and we talked some very specific, just pointed questions. Brad, as you said, like 50 questions, but they were really specific. And I think, that every parent and every kid's going to hear something in that they can relate to or that they've been thinking about, whether it's, what kind of sports drink should we drink after, training, so on and so forth. So
Supplements, things like that.
Yeah, she was great. So hope you enjoy it. Thank you. Welcome back to Pure Athlete. I'm Jeff Francoeur along with Brad Williams and Britt Lee. And guys, I'm excited about today's guest. I actually know her. I met her in 2015. I played baseball with her husband for the Philadelphia Phillies. He is now a hitting coach for the Baltimore Orioles, but she is definitely the smarter one in the family and the much more mature, but she is a sports nutritionist. Angie Asche, thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for that intro, for having me. Cody'll love listening to that, I'm sure.
It's great to have you, Angie.
Yeah, thank you.
So what have you been up to? I know you got a little girl now.
Yep. So we have a daughter, 1.5-year-old, and I run a private practice. So Elite Sports Nutrition is my practice. I'm a sports dietitian. So working primarily with high school, college professional athletes. I mean, we work with a wide range. I've got a team of dietitians here, so we get to work with so many different sports and endurance athletes. It's something new every day. So it keeps us on our toes, and we love it. It's been great.
So Angie, just to kind of jump into the whole sports nutrition area, our audience is parents and kids that are in youth sports from 8 to 18. So tell us a little bit about the relationship between performance and nutrition, because I've been in this world for a long time, and most of the time you see that people don't think there's any relationship between those two. So enlighten us a little bit.
Yeah, sure. And actually, it's funny you bring that up because understanding that relationship is really what brought me into sports nutrition to begin with. I was a competitive athlete myself in high school and had a bunch of different GI issues that were just causing me to not really see any progress. And I was really competitive, wanted to get better. And so meeting with a sports dietitian in high school and understanding kind of what they do and just realizing just how much nutrition impacts your performance is really how I became a sports dietitian today. So really what it is you have to remember food is fuel to the point of what food you're putting in your body is going to determine, how your performance is either going to be hindered or if it's going to be improved. So are you fueling it at the right time and with the right nutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats? They all definitely matter. And you can tell. I mean, you can see a huge difference when you just change some things about your diet. And I know me personally, that's what really inspired me was I changed my diet and how I was eating, my horrible eating habits as a high schooler. And I thought, wow, this is a no-brainer. How is not, how does no one else doing this? So I feel like once athletes do kind of really change their diet, make healthier choices, that's when it really clicks for them personally. And they see, oh, wow, it really does matter, how early in advance before a game I eat, or, the types of foods that I'm eating before a game, or what I'm doing after as far as recovery and how I'm feeling in the days following and leading into the next game. So it really does make a difference on so many different levels.
Why do you think it's become such a big subject in the last 10 or 15 years? Is it because there's more research now? People talk about it more? Because I remember when I broke in '05 in Atlanta, I mean, it was like you'd go in for a day game and there's donuts, and Cinnamon Toast Crunch. And like, that is not happening anymore. You have omelet stations, egg whites. Like, why do you think it finally came to the forefront?
I think a lot of different reasons. I think it goes back to just more research. We know we're finding more and more through science just how much of an impact nutrition has on our performance. And so the more we realize that, the more that organizations, especially, MLB teams, professional teams, realize, well, shoot, if this can take us, even just 1% better than the other team, then, we need to make some changes here. So you see a lot of teams adding a sports dietitian to their staff. Some universities have like 4 or 5 dietitians. So I think having someone, obviously, for them to talk to and educate is huge, but also just making changes within the clubhouse. So you might find some of those, unhealthy foods still throughout the clubhouse, but you'll also find a lot of things like turmeric shots and like a smoothie station. And we know the benefits of those anti-inflammatory foods now. And obviously, I think just like I said, that 1% better can make a huge difference.
Angie, what age do you recommend? I know you have high school clients. Your agency does, your firm does. What's a good age for parents and kids to start really thinking about nutrition, but also maybe hiring a professional to help them in their journey?
It's funny because we have some athletes who, depending on the sport, it gets competitive young. I'll say depending on the sport and the state. I have some, like a swimmer who is 12 years old training for the Olympic trials. Like it's nuts how some sports just they're very, very young. So I think it depends on, I'll say that, the sport and I think just the athlete in general, but typically we don't say till high school. So high school is usually when we start working with athletes, 14 and older. If you're in at that high school age, you need to start kind of picking up these skills too, because you're going to make a big transition soon, whether that's, you're going to go off to college for the first time and you're going to have to learn how to cook scrambled eggs, like just little basic things like that. Or maybe you're going to go from being the very best player on your high school team to now you just entered the draft, and now you're in a very large organization with over 200 different players that you're competing against. So I think it's just, depends on the person, depends on the sport, but I'd say in general, high school is probably a good starting point.
So Angie, tell us what that looks like if a parent and a kid go to somebody like yourself and say, "Hey, we're 16 years old, we want to play next level." I know it depends on what sport, but they need some help. What does that process look like? Is it a one-time thing? Or are they signing up for a 6-session thing? What does all that look like?
Yeah, good question. So the shortest duration we have is 2 sessions. So
Okay.
they have to meet with us at least twice. And that's just because that first meeting, we throw quite a bit of information. It's kind of information overload a little bit for that age,
Yeah.
16, that we want to check in on them and see, all right, what changes have you made? How are you progressing? What questions do you still have? So there's always that second meeting. That's definitely the shortest amount of time, but I'd say for the majority of our high school kids, we're meeting with them for at least 2 months so that they really have, I mean, think about it, in an hour and a half, like that barely covers the surface when it comes to nutrition. So And they're also dealing with TikTok trends and Instagram trends and trying to, clear up the confusion on all of that. And depending on their goals, maybe if they want to gain 20 pounds, that's not going to happen in one meeting, right? So at least working with them for a few months and maybe having that, just that texting communication even is huge with high schoolers, right? Like I don't expect them to get on a Zoom call every week, but if they can text me and maybe send me pictures every now and then, that just works better for them, and that's fine. But at least just having that person to help them, guide them, so that they can at least start making progress. And then once they really start seeing that, then they can, kind of hopefully continue on their own.
Guys, I'm going to validate that because these guys have heard this story a little bit, but I have twin boys who were big time tennis players, and I took them to see a sports nutritionist because we had all kind of cramping issues that we couldn't solve, and we went twice, and it wasn't enough. I mean, I wish we had gone longer because there was so much information for us to try to digest on our own. Pardon the pun. But they gave us a plan and all those types of things. But then in trying to do that, there just were so many things that came up, and we didn't go back. And looking back, that was a mistake.
You're a bad dad.
I know,
Yeah.
terrible.
Man.
At least I took
Horrible.
them. You're just throwing the.
That's a good point. You took them. So
It could have been the dietitian too. You never know.
Could have been.
Good
Could have
call.
been.
Maybe you weren't a great role model for them. Like it's one thing to take them
I
to
don't-
it, but it's
I
another thing
don't-
like
I don't like the direction this interview's going.
when
all
you,
right, so I'm going to change the subject and ask you because I'm a big carb guy. Okay,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
how much is too much carbs? How much is carb loading?
Okay. Well, I mean, you could do too much of anything, right? But I would say so. Carb loading should never really be a part of any sort of like sport besides
Dang it.
endurance sports.
You're ruining this for me.
Like if you're like, I envision like if you guys are the Office fans, like Michael Scott, like right before he's about to do like a 5K, like
The Alfredo.
there's no reason you need the Alfredo, very fat, heavy meal. So you definitely don't need to carb load before a football game or before like a 9-inning baseball game. I would not recommend that, but it is actually effective for if you're an endurance athlete and you're going to be performing at that same intensity for several hours. So if you're going to go out and do a marathon or ultra marathon or Ironman, whatever else, carb loading is super helpful. But you can definitely overdo the carbs. But carbs, see, that's the problem though, is carbs get such a bad rap to begin with that people like, I feel like so many athletes are under fueling with carbs, at least that first come to us because they think, well, I don't want to overdo it. But I will say, yes, you can overdo it. Some of the main issues that I see with athletes is GI issues. So just like they feel bloated, they feel uncomfortable, especially when they're, in the middle of a game. If you start having like those like, side aches, things like that, like you might have done too many carbs and not enough fluids. That's also an issue we see a lot. And yeah, it's just going to be kind of one of those things where you got to reduce your carbohydrates a little bit, and especially with the timing around your workouts. Obviously, weight gain is another issue. If you're overdoing the carbs, you're probably overdoing the total calories. And
That's why
yeah,
the pasta's putting pounds on me. Is that what you're saying?
not to oversimplify what you do, but I'm not that smart, so I need things oversimplified. But if you're looking at a young athlete, let's say a high school athlete, and you could say, there's one thing that I want you to remove from your diet, and there's one thing I want you to always include in your diet, what would those two things be?
ooh, what a good question.
Every
One
guest
thing to
says that to me.
remove.
It really is
It's the
amazing.
first time I've heard it.
Really? Okay, so I'll be totally honest with you, just because it's the first thing that came to my mind is soda. So I think there's a time and place for soda, like I do. And actually, I've got a couple Ironman clients that they love soda in the middle of their like, 8-hour long Ironman. But if you're a high school kid and you're just sipping on soda during class, like there's really no nutritional benefit to that at all. So soda is the first one that came to mind. If you can cut that out, that's great. And the second part of your question, if you could add something in, I'm going to say vegetables, which is very like, oh, of course, the dietitian says vegetables. But like, hear me out. Vegetables are so underrated when it comes to sports nutrition. And I just feel like athletes don't realize the benefits that come from the micronutrients in veggies. Like they're always asking about these supplements and they'll be like, oh, well, I take these, these dietary nitrates. I take this beetroot juice and this and this and this. And it's like, if you just ate vegetables, like that's where those things are coming from. So I think just understanding that number one, athletes are definitely not eating enough. I think 1 in 10 Americans right now are meeting the minimum requirements of veggies. So getting more veggies in is huge. And then just learning a little bit, like I'll walk with the athlete and say like, hey, have you ever heard of antioxidants before? And like, oh yeah, there's this antioxidant supplement or this greens powder or whatever else. Well, you can get that from vegetables. So that would be the one I recommend eating more of.
So Angie, I want you to elaborate on that a little bit, because I think most people are kind of familiar with what carbs do, kind of familiar with what protein does, and you can touch on that in a few minutes. But you just mentioned a bunch of supplements that you can get through vegetable. What do they do for an athlete?
Sure. So, well, the first thing I think of with vegetables is the antioxidants. And when we are exercising, especially strenuous exercise, we are creating, try to put it as simply as possible here, we're creating additional oxidative stress. So, essentially over time that can lead us to muscle soreness, like severe muscle soreness. It can increase the risk of injury, things like that. And so it might slow us down as we try to progressively make these training adaptations, right? So when we consume antioxidants, especially from food, and not a supplement form but from food, it has all these compounds that really work synergistically together to help fight against this oxidative stress or these free radicals that occur. So really what it can help with is the things I just mentioned, things like muscle recovery and muscle soreness and things like that. So the antioxidant piece is huge. And not only that, but yes, we meet with a lot of high school athletes, but we also meet with a lot of older athletes in their 30s that are really coming to us because they want, the longevity of their career. And so from a longevity standpoint and an overall health standpoint, things like that are, antioxidant rich or anti-inflammatory, those are extremely important to incorporate in your diet regularly. So that would be number one. And then I'd say number two, looking at the things like I mentioned, nitrates. So like, let's say you take arugula, for example, is a very underrated vegetable, right? Does anyone like
I'm
arugula?
a big,
Right? Arugula
big
salad.
fan.
You mean arugula salad, right?
Yes, arugula salad. So
Big
you can
fan.
share this
Impressive.
fun fact with.
Not many, but I do eat one.
Way to add a lot to the podcast, Jeff.
Thank
with
you.
that little known
Y'all knew
fact.
this. Nutrition's not my strength. You know that. I mean,
I'll tell you what, our listeners can learn today that arugula is in a salad. That's something
Hey,
they're going to
and
walk
I'll go
away
ahead and
from
tell you
this.
right now, her husband, he would hammer a cheesesteak before a game too. So don't let him act like he's the healthiest dude in America.
Oh, I could say a lot of things here, but I'll continue on with my arugula. So arugula. Next time you're sitting eating a salad with someone, you can share the fact that beetroot juice, they get a lot of hype about how rich they are in dietary nitrates. Arugula is actually even higher. And so when we consume things like beets or things like arugula, what happens is we are consuming nitrates, which our body, once we consume them, like once the enzymes are basically mixed in with our saliva and mouth, they turn into nitrites, and then our body eventually converts it to nitric oxide. Well, what nitric oxide does is it's a vasodilator. So that allows for more blood to flow to our muscles, which can help in obviously a lot of different endurance exercises and things like that. So a lot of people will take a pre-workout with dietary nitrates or like a beetroot pre-workout, things like that. But we can consume these things regularly in our diet. And of course, blood flow is important regardless. We want good blood flow, not just pre-workout, but we want that flow even after our workout so that we can help bring more blood to the muscles to help recover and so on. So these types of, leafy greens and veggies are important for that too.
Awesome. Let's talk about some situational eating and get really specific. Pre-game meal, and I know it's different maybe for soccer than it is for baseball, but
Well, that's what. Yeah, I was going to say you have a 7:30 football game on a Friday night for a high school kid. What should his day look like?
Okay, perfect. So hopefully you had a good balanced breakfast. You want to distribute protein evenly throughout the day. So start your day with a good protein and carb rich breakfast. And then I'd say kind of same thing for lunch. you almost have to have with a 7:30 game, you almost have to have like an early dinner. Like maybe when I worked with a college volleyball team for a while, and they always had kind of their like pre-match meal around 4 o'clock. And so that's about 3 hours or 3.5 hours in this scenario out. That's perfect timing. So you want to have all three components here of carbs, protein, and fats. And I'm a visual person. So I always, when I'm talking through this with like the football person, let's say the football player, I'll have a visual up with this like graph that kind of shows how the closer you get to the time of your game, the amounts of different macronutrients decrease or change. So in the case of carbohydrates, with that 3 hour away from your game meal, you're going to have more complex carbs. So you can handle a little bit more fiber. You can handle something like quinoa or sweet potatoes or regular potatoes or brown rice. Those types of carbs are fantastic in that pre-workout meal. So maybe you've got sweet potatoes. And then you can have healthy fats in that meal because it's far enough out from your game that your body will have plenty of time to help digest those fats. But I do want to stick them as much as you can to healthy sources of fat. So maybe you do some salmon, or maybe you do, you drizzle some olive oil on top of like veggies or something like that. Or you have a salad. We'll keep it easy because let's be honest, this is a high school football player here. So maybe you do ranch on top of a salad. Cool. And then you've got some sort of color on your plate, so some sort of veggies. And then, of course, lean protein, so something like chicken or fish or like a really lean ground beef, something like that. Tofu if you're vegan, vegetarian. And then as you get closer to that game time, the type of carbohydrates is going to change a little bit. So now we had that really well-balanced meal about 3.5 hours out. And maybe about 6:30 or 7 p.m., you want just a really quick, easy to digest source of carbohydrates. And so that's going to be something like a banana. So you got that simple source of carbs. Maybe you do banana, maybe you do like a little bit of chocolate milk, maybe you do like a little bit of Greek yogurt with strawberries, something like that. So protein is great too, carbs and protein, but fat should really be minimized. And again, it's the type of carbohydrates you don't want to have a ton of fiber, pre-workout. So that's kind of the setup I would have. If you're someone that gets really nervous, we work with a lot of like pitchers, especially who they have a lot of nerves before the game. So they might do something like a liquid source of carbohydrates, just because having any sort of food pre-game, before they start can lead to some GI issues. So that might be something like, a sports drink or like an electrolyte powder that also has sugar, carbohydrates in it.
Okay, so now let me give you another scenario. I coach my daughter's travel softball team. Say you're playing 4 games in a day, on a Saturday, spaced out 9, 12, 3, 6. Where do you start and how do you keep them replenished all day to play at night without just eating nerd ropes or, I mean.
That's for you. That's
Yeah,
that's a good point.
that's hard. Yeah, those tournament days are really hard. And honestly, like those simple sources of carbohydrates, they are great. But when you have like that many games in one day, I'd say if you have kind of base it like if you have 1 hour or less, it should be primarily carbs. So that could be like applesauce pouches are great for this with kids, like those little like go-go
Yep.
squeeze. Those things are awesome. I mean, we even have like 25-year-olds who are like, yes, I love these. But those are great. Fruit is obviously great because it's also hydrating. So like fresh watermelon or any type of fruit. The nerd ropes are totally fine in moderation too. I mean, it's a simple source of sugar if they
See?
have that quick turnaround.
See, Brad?
Now, if she's got a couple hours though, like if she's got, 2 hours,
Yeah.
I'd say that's enough time to have more substance. So maybe she's got a PB&J or a little turkey sandwich, or you've got Greek yogurt and berries and some granola, like a little yogurt parfait, something like that. String cheese with fruit, hard-boiled eggs with fruit. Those are all options that our athletes really like. Or just as simple as like an energy bar, some type of like, fruit and nut-based bar would
Yeah.
be good too.
So a lot of times at tournaments, whether it be baseball or tennis or volleyball or whatever, in the lunch period, parents will take their kids out to a Subway or to Chick-fil-A or to fast food places. Is that okay?
Yeah, and we actually, so on Instagram, I do a lot on Instagram here, but Elite Nutrition, ELEAT Nutrition is our Instagram. And we do this a lot where we share like healthy options on the go because obviously, especially in minor league baseball, you're choosing between like a Subway or a gas station, so like the options are not very fantastic. So there you can make a healthy option anywhere you go. It's just going to be, and especially around training, focus again on carbohydrates and protein and really minimizing fat, which unfortunately a lot of fast food places are so high in fat. They're fried, breaded. So if you could opt for like grilled chicken sandwich or like the grilled nuggets from Chick-fil-A, something like that, and then pairing it with any type of fruit or bread or starchy vegetable like potatoes, those are all going to be great options. Of course, French fries, I'd say maybe try to limit, but other forms of potatoes, baked potatoes are great. The sandwich places are actually one of the best places because then you can just get, you can get the bread with, load up the lean protein. So maybe you do chicken or turkey, and then you've got tons of veggies that you can put on there. And depending on the time, if it's, still 3 or 4 hours out, you can still add a little bit of fat like cheese or like a dressing on top if you wanted to.
So we always talk about on Pure Athlete, kind of like for parents to really to let the kids kind of own their journey. How, as a parent, how do you convince your kid that eating healthy is going to affect, first of all, they can feel better, but also is going to affect their athletic performance in a positive way? Because even as adults, I didn't realize, and I recently cut out sugar, how I would feel so much better when I cut out sugar. For all these years, I didn't know what it would feel like. And so explaining to my children, you're going to feel better or you're going to perform better is really, really hard. Do you guys include that kind of a sports psychology in your programs to try to help the parents help the kids?
He's letting everybody on
Yeah.
the podcast know he cut out sugar,
sugar.
if you're wondering.
It's a humble
It's a
brag.
straight dig,
It's a
man.
humble brag.
That's awesome. How has that been? It's been good.
At 56 years old, it has been very, very hard. And I don't want to co-opt this interview, but I love Coca-Cola and I love sweet tea being in the South. And I probably lived off that for 25 years. And so for the last 4 months, going without it has been really difficult, but I feel so much better. And so hopefully I'll look a lot better too. You guys noticed the difference in season 1 and season 2, Well, anyway, it's trying to explain to my kids though that, if you do the same thing, you'll feel better, or because so many adults kind of own their kids' journey. So we want the kids to own their own journey. So in terms of sports nutrition, what do you recommend to kind of push them along that journey, but let them own it?
Yeah, good question. I think, just being honest and educational. So like I am very blunt and brutally honest with our athletes. I don't sugarcoat things, like no pun intended there, but I really don't. So I say like, hey, this is really going to help your performance and this isn't. So we kind of just talk about the honesty there, but I think, as a parent, I would say that especially at a very, very young age, like Frenchie's kids ages. Like obviously that's something where I wouldn't say like, no, you can never have sugar, don't do that, because I really do think it backfires. And so still having those things around, but maybe just saying like, hey, this is a great source to have when you're super active. Like let's save this sports drink for when you're playing soccer with your friends, and that way it kind of changes the story. Like they still have that and they realize, oh, there's a purpose for this. There's a even this type of carbohydrates, because I don't think that any carbs are necessarily bad, right? It's situational. Like that carbohydrate is still, like I even mentioned with the Coca-Cola or the Pep or the Coke with the Ironman athlete, there's still an instance where that's actually really helpful. But I think just teaching them that, hey, maybe let's not have this all the time, or, in certain situations where it's not helpful, like if they're just sitting and, watching TV, that's probably not the best thing to sip on. And just kind of educating them a little bit about how carbohydrates are used by the body and how they really are used for energy. So when we are using a lot of energy with physical activity, our body needs more of them. And when we aren't, our body doesn't, just kind of trying to simplify it even as much as that.
What's the worst food you could have an hour and a half before a game?
I'd say probably like a cheeseburger, like anything that's just like heavy fat. Yeah, heavy fat. Or I'll just say, yeah, it's hard because even cheeseburger, someone could argue like, well, there is carbs in that though. But yeah, just heavy fat, anything that's also heavy fiber. Like I wouldn't recommend like downing a big old bowl of like chia pudding either, like, and that's the problem is a lot of people see these healthy foods and they think like, oh, that's so nutritious, I'm going to have this chia pudding and then go for a 10-mile run. Like that's not ideal because it's very high fiber. So
Wouldn't it have been pretty common, like when you played high school football, the pregame meal might have been a steak.
Well, they had, yeah. I mean, they had protein, different types of things. But I can say, like, for me, I knew, like, during baseball, we'd eat a steak, like, at night
Yeah.
with a day the next day, like, because if you eat a
It's heavy.
10-ounce filet, you feel like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, we joke, what do we call it? The meat
It's heavy.
sweats. You just want to get into bed and just go to bed. It's a
So-
great,
Yeah.
So let's talk about post workout, whether you're training, really hard for 2 hours or you've just played a game. And, I think we want protein, but talk about that. What proteins are good? Is it a protein drink? Is it, just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So, and protein obviously is very important post workout. I try to simplify recovery with the 3 R's. So there's 3 R's to recovery. So it's you want to refuel with carbohydrates. So your body just utilized carbohydrates, and really to help with that recovery process, it needs a little bit of carbohydrates. Repair, that's going to be protein. So repairing muscle tissue, and also, of course, hopefully, potentially building new muscle tissue. Protein is key for that. And then number 3 would be to rehydrate or replenish your electrolytes. So that's going to be obviously fluids and electrolytes, magnesium, potassium, sodium. So trying to create a meal around that has all 3 can be sometimes difficult, especially for athletes that have like a really poor appetite, or maybe for, like, in the case of, like, when Frenchie was talking about, baseball players, like if they have a really, really late game and they maybe don't want to eat a huge dinner, if you are someone in that situation, a smoothie could be really great because it can have all 3 in one. You can put carbohydrates in there with, say, a banana or some other type of carb source. You can put protein in there with protein powder, easy, yogurt if you don't want to do protein powder. And then obviously it's a smoothie, so it's liquid. It's got those liquid, and then electrolytes could come from, let's say you use coconut water or something like that to get a little bit more electrolytes in. So smoothies are really great post-workout. You mentioned protein shake. Totally fine if you want to do a protein shake. If you could, pair it with a source of carbohydrates, that's awesome too. Like maybe you have the protein shake and a banana, something like that. If you're someone that's going to eat a meal shortly after you work out, you don't have to get that protein shake in. You can technically just have a meal an hour or 2 later, and that will absolutely count as a post-workout meal. There's this misconception that you like have to get a protein shake in, and then, well, if you're going to go eat a meal anyway that has at least 20 grams of protein, that's good. But I would say shooting for at least 20 grams of protein is ideal post-workout. So this could be as easy as a couple ounces of meat or fish, or it could be a scoop of protein powder. So pretty easy to get to with different sources.
what is too late to eat a big meal? Like, you always hear that, like, it's past a certain point. What's that all about?
Yeah, well, I think especially with like the intermittent fasting trend has like really taken off too. So that's hard because you've got baseball players mid-season that are like, hey, I want to do intermittent fasting. And it's like, well, your game doesn't start until 7 o'clock every night. So that's going to be a little tough. But ideally, I mean, if your game is ending at 10, 10:30, 11, I'm hoping that if you did play a lot, if you did play most of your game, regardless if that's football or soccer or whatever sport, you really should have something post game. Now, if you just sat in the dugout for 9 innings, or you like maybe pinch hit, like you don't need a post game meal, right? Like you'll probably be good just not eating until morning. But that's up to you, and it really depends on what your entire day looked like as a whole. So we've got to look at, what time and what did you have for breakfast, and a lot of athletes ask me this too about protein specifically. They're like, well, how much protein do I need, post workout? And really, it depends on how much protein you ate throughout the entire day too. So just really looking at your whole day, how much did you consume? And if you really underate and you're going into that post game and you're like, let's say 800 calories shy of your goal for the day, like you need to eat something. So I think just looking at your entire day, seeing where you're at, and then also the intensity of your game. If you played a lot, if you didn't, that'll dictate if you should eat or not. So,
Angie, what about supplements? I'm a high school athletic director, and especially boys are always asking about amino acids. They're asking about creatine, and they're asking about just whether like the athletic greens, things like that. And that's not really maybe a supplement, but what's your take on all that stuff?
Yeah, so well, athletic greens is absolutely a supplement. And one thing, supplements is a huge part of my like education with athletes, obviously. I'd say a massive amount of high school kids use at least one supplement. So any when you're confused on if something is a supplement or not, turn it over and look at the nutrition facts label. If it says nutrition facts, it's technically considered a food, so it goes through the FDA. If you look at the back and it says supplement facts, then it's actually a supplement. So a lot of athletes are mind blown when I tell them most energy drinks like Celsius, that's actually a supplement. Even though it's in a can and it's a beverage, that's a supplement. So it goes through no regulation through the FDA. And if it doesn't carry any third party testing, then you're putting yourself at risk of testing positive if it were in some rare instance to have a banned substance. And banned substances, a lot of people get confused by that too, because they think that, companies are purposefully always putting these, ephedra and all these other things in. And that's not necessarily always the case. I mean, sometimes, yes, they are, but other times you have to remember a lot of these supplement companies are producing their supplements in like large manufacturing companies with other different products. So I'll give you one example. There was a swimmer, an Olympic swimmer, who actually was just taking a multivitamin. It's just a multivitamin. It had no third party testing specific to athletes. And on the label, you would think there's nothing wrong with this. It doesn't have anything that it shouldn't have. So, you should be fine, right? Well, it was processed on the same line as a blood pressure medication. And so she actually ended up testing positive for doping and wasn't able to compete. And so that's why that third party testing is so important. So, number one, like before you have any supplement, I don't care where you bought it or who you saw selling it online, it has to be third party tested. So, NSF certified for sport is the one that's most regulated and or is the one that's most recommended in like MLB, NFL. And then next comes informed sport. So informed sport certified. And I know that as a high schooler, you're not technically tested for these things. And so that can be hard too to get across because then high schoolers are like, well, I'm not tested for these things anyway. But you really do run the risk of taking something that can absolutely affect your overall health too. I mean, if you're a 18-year-old and you don't need a blood pressure medication, but if you're, those kinds of things are getting, tainted into your supplements, like that's an issue regardless if you're drug tested or not. So looking for that third party testing is going to be number one. When it comes to supplements, I actually do recommend creatine, even at the high school level. Creatine is a very safe, effective supplement, and creatine monohydrate is typically the best form. Um, so that is one that I do recommend, but I think it just, again, it requires education because a lot of times, especially with high schoolers, they see something like creatine, they hear people say it's great, and they just assume more is better, right? But we know that that's actually not the case. And it's basically just a waste of money if they do more than the 5 grams recommended per day. So you might see, like, I had some athletes that were like, oh, well, I've been doing 20 grams a day for, 6 months. And I'm like, well, that's stupid. That's the biggest waste of money. Like it's, after your muscle stores are, saturated with phosphocreatine, like that's doing nothing for you. So just kind of, providing that education on dosage, on the types of supplements, timing, depending on the supplement is really helpful. But creatine is one I recommend. If they ask you about amino acids, I would ask them about their diet and how much protein they're consuming, because chances are if they are consuming, especially like an animal rich diet, so if they have any sort of dairy, eggs, meat, poultry, or fish, then chances are they're already getting enough of their essential amino acids in their diet, and supplementing with additional BCAAs is not going to do much of anything. In the case of athletic greens, I think there's, it's one of those things where it could potentially be somewhat helpful, but the problem is I have a lot of athletes that are like, oh, well, instead of eating vegetables, every day, like that's so much, and I travel so much, I'm just going to use this greens powder. Well, what we see in research is that the compounds actually in fruits and vegetables, they actually work together synergistically when you consume them in a whole food source, that you can't replicate that with a greens powder. And a lot of times that greens powder is so ultra processed that by the time that you're actually consuming it, it's really hard to tell how much of that nutrient you're actually getting from those greens. So, is it effective? Maybe. It's probably not harmful. In that instance, it at least does have a third party testing, so that's good. it's not one that I tell my athletes like, no, absolutely don't take this. But if they're taking it and they're like, hey, do you think I should continue it? Usually I say no, depending on their diet and if they're getting enough from other sources. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Speaking of that, you said Celsius. I'm just curious because I know a lot of athletes like those little power energy drinks before games. What are some good ones and what are some to stay away from?
Yeah, so I mean, caffeine in general is great. Like caffeine is definitely effective. We want some form of caffeine pre-workout. But so if you are a coffee drinker or if you like tea, those are great. If you want to have caffeine in a powder source that you can easily mix with water. One that I recommend is, and this is not sponsored in any way, but there's a few different pre-workouts, Clean Athlete and Ladder. Those are both good brands that have third-party tested products. But again, I wouldn't really recommend a pre-workout to like a 15-year-old because I'm going to say, why do you need a pre-workout? Like, are you not like you're 15 years old? Like you should have so much energy. Be like, what's your sleep like? Like, let's talk about how much sleep you're getting. Let's talk about your sleep habits. What's your screen time like? And also, what are you eating before? So the best pre-workout I say is food first and foremost, and then caffeine's a close second. We know that caffeine is very helpful to cognitive performance. So if we can get it from a more natural source, that's even better.
What about energy gels? Are they effective? Do you recommend them?
Yeah, so energy gels, I mean, so what it is usually it's a mixture of carbohydrates and caffeine. So you've got a small amount of caffeine depending on the brand. Um, the only time I recommend them is really endurance athletes. And it's really, I mean, if you're just in it for the long haul, right? Like you are 20 miles in and you're like, all right, I need a little bit of additional caffeine. Plus, when you're in the middle of exercise, ideally, if you're training for longer than, say, 90 minutes, you should be consuming carbohydrates during exercise. So if you're out there, you're competing for over 90 minutes straight, let's get a source of carbohydrates. And gels can be an easy way to get those in. So I think, for athletes that are doing that prolonged exercise, so like I said, over 90 minutes, they need an immediate source of carbohydrates and maybe they do need a little bit of a caffeine boost. They could be a good option, but one thing to remember is it's a very, very concentrated form of carbs. And so if you just take that and you have no fluids with it, it can cause a lot of GI issues. And we see this a lot in runners. So you have to sip water before, take your gel, make sure you're drinking, some water after. It's kind of the pros and cons of something like a gel versus like a sports drink is a lot of people think, oh, well, now I don't have to guzzle down, 16 ounces of a sports drink. I can just take this tiny little
Right.
gel.
Yeah.
Well, you got to drink some water with that.
So Britt, when you're doing those all day pickleball tournaments, do you think that gel's what you're going to go with now? Is that going to help you kind of when you're 20 hours in?
There's all kind of stuff I'm going to do.
I mean, this is really, I think it's going to help you perform
Cut
a lot
out
better.
sugar.
Well, I know I'm going to finish it up here. We thank you for joining us, but I got one last question, and then if you have one, that's fine. My last question to you is breakfast, because I'm not a massive breakfast eater. I drink my coffee in the morning with the kids, but even my kids don't do an unbelievable job of eating breakfast. How important is breakfast? And if they don't love something, eggs and bacon, don't want to have that, what's something they can have that can really jumpstart their day as they go to school?
Good question. Well, I
Thank
will
you.
say so many athletes, unfortunately, are under eating protein at breakfast. Like they'll be like, oh, I just had a bowl of cereal, or oh, I had this granola bar, or these little breakfast biscuits, whatever else. And so then, really, you fast forward to lunch and dinner. And if they're not snacking at all during school, those are the only two times during the day that they're actually getting protein in. So it's kind of no brainer that they're either not meeting their performance goals, they're not able to build muscle, or they're feeling really sluggish. So breakfast really is important. It's just a really good way to start your day, but it does have to contain some sort of protein. So I would say to someone who doesn't love breakfast, maybe just make a smoothie and maybe try like I even make my daughter some, she's only, a toddler, but she loves making smoothies with me. And so that's one thing you could do. Get the kids involved to make smoothies and maybe they'll like that a little bit better. Otherwise, as long as you're eating, I would just say, look what you're eating throughout the rest of the day. And as long as, because there are plenty of people that are very successful with intermittent fasting. And if they don't eat until 10 or 11 a.m., as long as they're still getting in the nutrition that they need throughout their eating window, then, I'm not as concerned about breakfast. But that's such a select population, right? Like, I don't want a 16-year-old high school kid to listen to that and think, oh, well, she said that I don't, as long as I don't eat whatever, if I don't eat breakfast, if I'm intermittent fasting, like, no, 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 no. This more so for the older working population. But with high school, I just think that, you're just on the go, go, go between classes, and a lot of schools don't even allow you to have food for snacks during the day. And that if you just go to your school and you don't even eat breakfast before, you're setting yourself up for a very large calorie deficit by the time you get to lunch.
So I don't have any more questions, but I do just want to say, man, this is fantastic information for our audience and for us. And I want to emphasize again, you mentioned your Instagram site or account, and I've been on it, and it is packed full of great information that's packaged really well. So tell our audience again how they can follow you on Instagram.
Yeah. All right. So, and thank you. You can follow me at Elite Nutrition. That's ELEAT Nutrition. Mainly on Instagram. I try my hardest with TikTok, and I don't even try that hard with it, honestly. So it doesn't exist.
Well, it's really good. So we would definitely recommend following Angie here.
Well, thank you so much for your patience from 3 out of shape older guys asking a lot of different, varied questions. But this is great. I think our audience is going to love it.
Yeah, why did you not get on me more in 15 about my eating habits? I could have maybe got another year or 2 out of it.
Cody says the same thing all the time. Here he is. He's coaching now.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. That's all we got left.
Cheesesteaks.
Those cheesesteaks hit home. Well, thank you so much. I know we appreciate your time, and we'll let you get back to your little girl. Hey guys, Jeff Francoeur here. Thanks for checking out Pure Athlete, and subscribe to our channel on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you go to listen to our podcast.